Welcome to the long and short of it, powered by Vertices Partners. We hope that you and everyone around you are safe in these unprecedented times. We know that this situation has been a trying one like no other. It has had a tremendous impact on the economy. To discuss this and how it impacts the lives of entrepreneurs and investors, we have today with us a panel of some wonderful women who are leaders in their own right. Joining us today are Sairi Chahal, founder of Sheroes. Sheroes is perhaps India's largest women-centric community platform, offering support, resources, opportunities, e-commerce, finance, and interactions via sheroes.com and the Sheroes app. Sairi has successfully built this platform to solve the problems of gender disparity in India. She's a seasoned entrepreneur with her first entrepreneurial experience dating back to 1999. Sheroes has over 18 million women on its network, and about 10,000 women are working via it as remote workers. Sairi is also a fellow of the Ananta Aspen's Kamalayan Bajaj Fellowship and a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. We also have Smriti Chandra, Investment Director, Nordic Microfinance Initiative, a Norway-based growth capital fund which specializes in investments in the microfinance sector and is one of the premium investors in India in the sector with around 10 portfolios in the country. Prior to NMI, she was a co-founder of a boutique investment banking outfit, First League Ventures, based out of New Delhi, India for 3 years, with a key focus on supporting startup companies in M&A and raising seed to Series A venture capital funds across technology and consumer sectors. Previously, Smriti also worked at EY for 10 years, where she served clients in multiple sectors with a focus on transaction advisory services, including investment banking, financial due diligence, and bid advisory services. She's a qualified chartered accountant from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Next, we have Naiya Sage, founder of Baby Chakra. Baby Chakra is perhaps India's largest maternity and childcare platform and is helping new parents learn about parenting. Prior to Baby Chakra, Naiya was a management consultant where she worked extensively on her areas of passion being maternal and child health and education. Interestingly, in spite of being a non-tech person herself, she founded her own venture in tech space eventually. Baby Chakra is part of Niti Aayog's Committee on Maternal and Child Health. It has also been invited for an India community building discussion session with Mark Zuckerberg. It's a Facebook start company and also accelerated by Microsoft Ventures India. Naiya is a graduate of Harvard Business School class of 2012, where she was a Fulbright and J.N. Tata Scholar. And finally, we have Archana Khosla Burman, founder partner of Vertices Partners, a boutique law firm which specializes in corporate commercial and dispute resolution practice. The firm is amongst the top 10 law firms of the country in the private equity and venture capital practice. Archana advises budding as well as seasoned entrepreneurs, is developing a women-centric platform, and is a part of committees of various chambers of commerce to promote entrepreneurship in the country. We thank all of you for giving your valuable time today. With that, I would hand it over to Archana to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Gauri, for those introductions. It is absolutely wonderful to have the three of you and to be joined by the three of you here today. Thank you, Sairi, Smriti, and Naiya. Great to have you here. I have had the pleasure of working with or discussing certain viewpoints with the three of you on different occasions. And what I find really refreshing is that all of you bring in diverse perspectives at your end with respect to your experiences and your individual journeys. Hearing from you for the next 45 odd minutes to 1 hour will add so much value to our audience and act as takeaways. So I'm really looking forward to this session. Let me start by first acknowledging that we are perhaps witnessing a black swan event of sorts and of a magnitude like never before. I think what makes it greater than few of the earlier crises is that it has not only created a healthcare and humanitarian crisis, but has also led to a turmoil vis-a-vis the economic stability. While there are several consequential setbacks of this pandemic, but the startup ecosystem seems to be one of the most vulnerable, as we all have seen. We are looking at liquidity crunches. Entrepreneurs are considering alternate revenues and digitizing offerings, pivoting their business models, scaling down, shutting down operations, contemplating even selling their businesses. Investors are battling as well, both as regards their current portfolio needs and managing LP expectations. So while it is clearly very difficult for the brick and mortar businesses to find their sustainability in this market, Seri, I would like to ask you my first question on how this has affected your business, given that Sheroes is one of the largest online women-centric platforms with a key focus on employment generation, social e-commerce, be it facilitating buying and selling of products and services, finding work, basically, having content. It's like a community for a set of women, which really helps them grow. So given this business model, how do you think this pandemic has affected? Is it that this has accelerated in terms of expanding your customer reach and probably boosting revenues? Or do you as well find it difficult to tide through these times?
Thank you. Thank you, Arch, for having us here. From where I see it as a founder, we've spent a lot of effort in driving what I call women's internet. Women are still 20% of the broader internet user base. Their adoption across mainstream categories is still low. But what the pandemic is doing to all of us is it's moved education and essential services online, and that has accelerated adoption of the internet by women. 5 years ago, there were about 10 million women online in India. The number is about 250 million, which means we have connected population, but adoption of internet has historically been low for women. So this lockdown is accelerating that, and we are seeing that happening on Sheroes as well. Like, just to give you a sense, March and April were our highest user acquisition months, and obviously we didn't plan for this. This was all organic, and users sort of finding us and us finding users. But at the same time, we can't let go of the fact that we're in the middle of a very deep societal and economic crisis. Industries that have existed and account for trillions of dollars of value are under threat, and that is impacting everyone. None of us is sort of going to get away from that, and clearly there's a pressure on jobs. There's a pressure on small businesses. There's a pressure on the person who's the lowest in the funnel, the smallest entrepreneur, the solo entrepreneur, the freelancer, the micro entrepreneur. And the pressure on them is huge because obviously they are losing income opportunities, they're losing traction in the businesses. So the domino effect is here to stay. It's affecting everyone. It's impacting women in more ways. The other thing we are seeing is that as the lockdown extends and as more and more people are at home, the cases of domestic violence against women have gone up. Strangely, it's a really unfortunate situation. We are also seeing a surge in the number of women reaching out for help around anxiety issues, mental health issues. We run a helpline on the Sheroes app where people can talk to our counselors, and that line has been busy all through the last 40-50 days. We are making special efforts to make sure that we deal with this. But the truth is, there is an upside and there is a severe downside. So and one has to sort of realign and re-execute at a very fast pace. And that's what we are trying to do as a team, as a company. And I think, and the other thing that's really, really clear is that none of us are sort of disconnected. We all are connected with the same threads. What impacts one company will impact the other. What impacts, one set of users will impact others. And I think it's also a time for sort of, reflection on that.
I think rightly said, there are some upsides, there are some downsides. What we at Vertices have seen that there is a considerable amount of traction on sectors which are based on technology, which are online predominantly, and have a direct impact on the end customer. So, be it a B2C edtech sector or the health tech sector, consumer tech, or even at times you see financial intrusion through technology in the fintech sector. So I think those are the ones which are in the greener side. But having said that, Smriti, this leads me to the question to you. Given that NMI invests in the financial services sector and specifically in the microfinance sector, which we all know for obvious reasons is one of the worst hit amongst the financial services sector and even otherwise, right? We are talking about a group of lenders who, as against their other peers, are basically exposed to the most vulnerable set of borrowers, the absolute grassroots level, blue-collared folks. You're talking about the daily wage earners, the rag pickers, who are completely dependent on their daily earnings. And as a result of the impact of COVID-19, will now have to uproot their systematic structure of repayment. Also for various MFIs, I think collections is a pain point currently, with field agents not being able to position to be out there and make the collections. So how are you seeing your portfolios coping up with this? And what's your advice or role? What role are you playing in terms of currently as an investor to address this situation?
Firstly, thanks, Archana, for having me on this fireside chat. I think it's an interesting experience. Yes, I do represent primarily the microfinance sector. That is where we are, fully engaged in. And no doubt, microfinance sector in this pandemic has claimed to be the most vulnerable one. And you mentioned some of the reasons why. Livelihoods of most of our customers are severely impacted. Raising questions on their ability to repay their current debt. And at the same time, it is also posing a huge potential for new credit when things restart. All of them earn on a daily basis, right? So when things restart, hopefully they'll start to earn again on daily basis and things will get to normalcy at some point. But of course, we don't know when that point is really going to come or when things will start looking normal. So all our portfolio companies are seeing a severe impact, if I might say. Our investees have had to keep the branches closed for almost 1.5-2 months now. Some branches have opened up in the green zones. The staff has been able to reach the branches, but unfortunately, no field work has been resumed. You should understand that microfinance is heavy on OPEX, which means there are physical branches. There are loan officers who go out into the field, villages every day for collections or for literacy training or for keeping tab on the customers' activities and so on and so forth, which has completely halted. And at the same time, the disbursements have also completely come to a halt. So the machinery of disbursements and collections and disbursement collections, which goes on a month-on-month basis, is completely stopped. So where are our investees today? So today, all we are focusing is what is the current cash reserves that our companies have? How will they manage for the next 3-6 months in terms of their OPEX? Keeping the branches alive, keeping the staff alive, well employed, so on and so forth. And the focus really has been on trying to make sure how are we keeping in touch with our customers, how are we engaging with them, how are we checking their well-being on a day-to-day basis, and at the same time for the staff as well. That's been the main work or focus for the last 6 to 8 weeks. But at the same time, we have one more big liability that hits all our microfinance institutions, which is that they have to continue to make their debt repayments. It's usually back-to-back lending. So while we have seen that RBI has intervened, there have been moratoriums that have been declared for the customers, our investees have not been provided with the moratoriums that was necessary by the banks. And that's where the crunch is really coming up. Hopefully, the situation is going to clear up as RBI and SBI have now confirmed. But nevertheless, it is a hanging sword on most of our investees. How long can the moratorium sustain? They will have to start paying their debt at some point or the other. So in a nutshell, where we are focused on today is to just make sure that our investees survive the next 3 months. They have enough cash reserves with them to pay their staff, to make their debt repayments, even though collections might not come. And the second aspect to it is that we still don't know what is going to be the impact on the portfolio once things open up. Will customers come back to pay? Will they say restructure the loan? Will they say we can't pay for another 6 months? We really don't know what is the outcome and the impact on delinquencies. I mean, microfinance historically has been the highest collection segment. We always see 98-99% of collections coming through and the least amount of NPAs. But it also gets impacted severely when situations like this come. So for us as investors, it's a wait and watch. I think July to September quarter is when we will actually start seeing what kind of impact has this pandemic really had, and then take it from there. As investors, for all our portfolio companies, I think we have expedited our internal processes to make sure that we are ready with funds when the portfolio company needs. We're ready to back them either through our interim liquidity facility, or if they want to strengthen the capital adequacy ratios, then through that. But we are kind of gearing up to help our portfolio companies as and when they need the cash.
Right. So like Smriti and you and I were discussing earlier, right? Cash is king. In fact,
absolutely, especially in this kind of a business.
Absolutely. And in fact, this is perhaps becoming the motto that every entrepreneur worth his or her salt is realizing. And gradually, I think what we will see is a significant shift towards profitability, taking far more precedence than scale. And at times, perhaps even at the cost of scale, once a company is somewhat established. The thought will be, might as well be small, lean, and in the green. So
that is true. But I think that's a phase only for the next 3 months. Right. Yes, nobody is going to question this year, what's your growth been? The question will always be, how have you survived? So that shift is definitely going to happen. But that really does not mean that you lean out completely and wait. I think you have to build up new strategies around it.
Right. Naya, coming to you. So Baby Chakra is one of the largest online platforms for baby care and parenting. It has elements around content, information, access to experts, and a marketplace. Like you and I were discussing, given the supply chain challenges, we are all witnessing, be it due to the difficulties around procurement from the warehouses to the last mile delivery. So how are you tackling this issue around the supply chain difficulties? Also, the second question I had was that has the opening up of the legislation around online consultations by the telemedicine guidelines been a breather of sorts and an enabler for your online consultation piece?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me, Archana. I think it's a real privilege to be on this amazing panel with and sort of hear the insights from different perspectives as well. So very quickly, with Baby Chakra, the mission has always been, how do you create a companion of care to parents through their journey of pregnancy and parenting, right? And that's always been the mission. And a very important part of that mission has, in order to build that trusted companionship, has been to be able to get experts onto the platform, right? So over last year, we actually have gotten on more than 1,800 pediatricians and gynacs. We're also the exclusive digital partner to the ISPAT, which is the second largest association of gynacs in India, right? So we've always been sort of focused on the whole health, wellness, integration and the ecosystem building there. Myself, as my background, and you know this, right? I was working in healthcare earlier, and I did work very interestingly way back about 10, 15 years back with a telemedicine startup. And it was frustrating because, at that point in time, we had all these amazing qualified doctors in the call center, but the only sort of advice they could dispel when someone called in to get advice on, let's say, conjunctivitis was, put yogurt on your hair. I mean, no one could prescribe any medicines, right? So I think, in so many ways for us at Baby Chakra, and for so many entrepreneurs and for so many, I think, practitioners as well, this whole COVID scenario has opened up, and I think the telemedicine and the guidelines you talk about by the MCA on 24th March, I think it's opened up a whole spectrum of possibilities and of improvement and enhancement of care, virtually with families that need it most. So I think that actually has been an extremely exciting paradigm for us at Baby Chakra as well, as we think about building out a more robust virtual ecosystem of companionship and care for our families. It's improved access drastically, right? The second thing I think that's really worked well for us so far has been that, this whole digital acceleration, and just to remind you, we have two revenue streams, right? The first revenue stream is actually with all the big brands who work with us to connect with our audience and to, learn more from them or to, talk to them at scale. But we've had a lot of shifts in terms of also the profile of these big brands who are now working with us, right? So it's shifted away from a regular FMCG place to saying that, there's a much more rapid digital acceleration with pharma companies, with companies that, normally would not even consider digital as a meaningful part of their marketing budgets. I'm sure Sairi is experiencing something very similar, right? So for them, suddenly digital has become, apart from, because print is gone, right? Out of home is gone, right? So how do you connect to people and really capture their mind space? Digital is the answer. So I think that's been extremely encouraging for us to sort of see the digital acceleration play out, and that's sort of reflecting in how brands also work with a company like ours. And I think the third thing that has worked out very interestingly, so, we actually, and just to sort of share a bit of a perspective, mid last year, we kind of, shifted focus. While we still have a marketplace, the focus moved to launching our own label of products because, again, in being mission aligned and being a companion to parents, we realized that parents had these latent demands in terms of products that they were telling us very explicitly on the platform or implicitly through their questions. And doctors were also telling us, you don't have these products available in the market. And, I think just to share something quite exciting, I mean, way back in November, we identified 3 initial SKUs to launch, which were a hand sanitizer for babies, a hand wash for babies, as well as a fruit, vegetable and toys wash, right? Which in November, when we started the formulation, the packaging and the branding journey, etc., people were like, on these extremely niche categories, right? And now fast forward to now, of course, the mother has now become the frontline worker in every family where she's evangelizing and making decisions, and everything has moved to now essential product purchases, and, sanitizers, washes and fruit, vegetable washes come within essentials now for a mother. So that decision making has changed to the product categories we decided to launch in, which were completely data back at that point in time. And secondly, as I say it very often, the Prime Minister of India is now the biggest community champion that we could have asked for in sort of, perpetuating and propagating the message of health, wellness, hygiene and nutrition. Right. So I think it's a very, very exciting time for Baby Chakra. I just want to caveat, I mean, of course, everything seems hunky-dory, right now from where we are, but it's not been easy to get us to a point as well where we felt that it required a lot of optimization on things like cash flows. We've made some tough decisions. We've done away with our office space, for instance. We've served notice. We've done away with that. So it's all the fixed costs on the business, right? We've done away with, as I think Smriti pointed out very well, right? In order to preserve cash, so we could not just survive, but we could thrive in the areas that we felt that we could win in and that we could thrive in. So I think that's really been the focus for us as a company as well.
Great. And I also feel, Naya, that once the lockdown opens up fully, owing, given the social distancing becoming the new normal now, consumers are more likely to opt for online shopping and e-commerce purchases much more than before as well. So I think that might work for your benefit as well.
Definitely. I mean, of course, I think very correctly, as you were pointing out, and I didn't fully address that, I think logistics, warehousing, these are essential to ensuring a very smooth experience for customers and for families when they buy from us or from any other platform for that matter. So I think there are still, of course, bumps, and there are ways in which the government is trying very hard with local bodies and also with industry associations to sort that out. But the bumps will exist for a while until I think we figure out the safe way for goods and for products and for orders to move within a state and also intrastate.
Great. If we talk about funding, it looks like the momentum for it will be much slower now, or maybe focused on certain key sectors. Smriti, I wanted to bring you in here on this. Given the kind of expertise that you have and the fact that not only do you wear the investor's hat and deal in a sector which perhaps has had one of the maximum impacts of this pandemic, but you have been an investment banker and an entrepreneur and had the opportunity to look across different types and forms of businesses and advise founders and funds alike. So I wanted to hear from you as to what do you think is the current sentiment in the investor community? Is the thought to wait and watch and reserve dry powder for portfolio safety? Or is it that this situation could perhaps spill up some good quality opportunities and assets at attractive valuations and therefore worth considering such opportunities?
So yes, one aspect is of course focus on impact sectors, financial services being the most one relevant now for me. But if I were to now step aside a little bit and look at it from a macro perspective. I think just like how today we have healthcare and essential services as termed as COVID warriors, they are in the forefront, changing things on the ground. In about 3 to 6 months, we'll see some more new sectors kind of emerge, post this COVID scenario, and they'll be on war footing to build our economic system stability and growth back. One of the sectors I believe will be on the forefront here will be financial services. I think we'll see a lot of investments coming into financial services 6 months down the line or 9 months down the line. But in addition, there will also be some other, new sectors that will come up. I think if I were to kind of just on top of my head think of a few things, working from home solutions will be on top. Then you have, hygiene, sanitization in workplaces. Any new ideas, new thoughts coming out of there will see some traction. So there are going to be multiple layers that will start floating around. There will be one huge segment which will be under digitization, as mentioned by Sari as well, that internet platform adoption is all going through the roof at the moment. So at some point there will be conversion of that, and sectors which are, or companies which are targeting specifically into driving that potential or converting that potential into a meaningful business model will see traction. So next 3 to 6 months, we'll see a lot of new opportunities that will come. And funds which are sector agnostic, funds which are working in early stage, seed stage, I see a lot of them showing interest in these opportunities and at least fueling some of the capital into these businesses. When it comes to slightly growth stage and late stage, capital investments, I'll definitely see some slowdown, because most of funds like us or in the bracket of investing $10 to $50 million, $100 million, we all invest into established businesses. And now it's the time we are really fueling the growth. And when the growth is stunted for some time, we will have to take different calls. So investments in this space will be very slow. I don't see it really opening up before the end of this financial year, which is the beginning of the next calendar year. So 2021 is when investments will start happening. Having said that, we saw that Nykaa has raised funds now. Shiprocket has raised funds. We invested as of yesterday. We've concluded a transaction. So investors who are sitting on funds, who have just raised funds or are in the beginning of their investment period, will look out for good opportunities. A good asset, a good promoter set, a good business model will see traction, and selectively investments will continue to happen. I don't think there is going to be a full stop on it. The only thing that adds on to this is the expectations that the promoters have. I think it's important that they recognize the situation, realize what the impact really is going to be, and be able to have a reasonable dialogue with the investors and come up with a win-win situation for both. Investors like to get the best deal, but here I think both of us are sailing in a similar boat, and the risk appetite is has to be equally shared. So I would see that the promoters have to start thinking about their valuation expectations. And if that is in line, investments can happen. There are a lot of funds like us who are sitting on new money to be invested in very early in our fund investment stage, and promoters should capitalize on that.
Absolutely. And I think that there may be tougher questions from investors to founders now, and therefore the funding rounds may take a little longer than usual, but they will happen.
Yeah, there'll be much more fine combing now. We will probably just not be happy with a certain set of unit economics. We'll also have to build in a lot of if and buts, and if this scenario and if that scenario happens, how address to it, how do you play that out? So a lot more questions will be there, and I think, for sectors like us, physical diligence is very important. And if we can't get out to the ground, if we can't speak to customers, if we can't visit the branches, speak to the employees, it becomes very difficult, especially in financial services. But non-financial services may still kind of speeden up, I would think, but that's a hope.
Seri, I would like to bring you in here.
Yeah.
Do you think certain founders would be more or less more accepting to being either acqui-hired or acquired now? And also, given that Sheroes has in the past acquired a number of startups, what has been your personal experience in relation to complementary fitment, especially in terms of in the times of adversity?
Right. So look, I think we all are in a similar situation. The lockdown is really nobody's advantage. Even if it looks like advantage, we're just trying to optimize where we are. So I do think that there might be more opportunities. And look, I think there are a lot of businesses who will either come under stress or who will question, their entire existence because of the market is where funding is, where their own product is, and I think it's important for a founder to sort of find a conclusion to what they're working on, and we've in the past we made about 5 acquisitions in all, and almost all of them happened for a very different reason. In certain cases, they were direct fitment to our product or to our vision. In certain cases, they were revenue opportunities. In certain cases, the team had a really good opportunity at Sheroes. So we're going to see an acceleration of that for sure across, because how long can you sort of survive if there is no visibility on where you should go? Some of us will be able to find that space. Some of us are luckier, but in certain sectors, especially in industries that are severely impacted, I think we will see more of that behavior. And also, I think ultimately, look, all of business is about scale, so there is a certain safety in scale, even for founders who are building something, running a small ship that's not sort of scaling as fast, or where there's less growth. The cost of survival is very, very high, so, and there's an opportunity cost to the founder time, and that's an irreplaceable commodity. Everything else is replaceable, but a founder's time never comes back. So that's how we've looked at it. And in fact, we are, we're in the middle of sort of looking at another acquisition that adds to the whole platform thesis. One of our partners, we've known them for so long, and then we figured we might as well do this as one entity. And I think you will see a lot more efficiency in operating costs, right? Like running a company is not just building the product or innovating or selling. It's also a lot of administrative costs, a lot of back end, a lot of compliance, and for a small company, those are really heavy baggages to carry, and or companies that are not sort of scaling up. So we're definitely going to see more of that, and I guess we all will also go deeper in reflecting, right, our whys and who we are, and where things are going, so some hard decisions will need to be taken, but I think they're for the good. They're good for everyone. If it gives people clarity in their lives, it gives people a safer home to the product that they worked on, or directionally it moves forward, right? I think it's the right thing to do at that point.
Right. And in fact, I think this resonates with the philosophy of survival through any necessary mode. Like in some, these startups go on to add that much more value once they enter the relevant cocoons, as we call it, right?
Yeah.
That basically allows them to unlock the value.
Absolutely. Like I was talking to, this founder whose company we're acquiring. She's going to join our team. And she said, look, I think my product will be much... it'll do much better within your ecosystem than mine, because I don't have the resources to support it, right? And we can do with her sort of experience, because obviously founders are exceptional, right? Like in terms of, they're all hard, and they bring like 200% of themselves. So it's a very different equation, and it's also a sign of a mature ecosystem. If you like, buying and selling companies in Bay Area is far more easier and far more frequent than here. And I think it's a sign of, because that means that more founders are building more companies and not just sort of, hoping for nirvana from one company that they've set up. Because I think entrepreneurship is a very iterative process. There's no right answer. There's not one success, and then there are founders like Jack who are building two unicorns at the same time, or things like that. So I think it's all part of growing the ecosystem at large.
But at the same time, you're also regularly seeing a lot more founders being open to convertible structures, valuation ratchets, downside protection offering oriented transactions, especially in this time, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think those are sort of instruments that just bring more trust and confidence into the ecosystem, right? I think today we all are sort of fighting also a trust deficit of sorts because of the macroeconomic situation. How do you fill that in? How do you fill in the situation where people are able to work with each other, and everybody has a goal to drive, everybody has a job to do, right? The investor's job is to make sure there's either capital protection or there's an upside to everything that they do. And an entrepreneur's job is to make sure all stakeholders are running, there's growth in the company, and somewhere that alignment needs to sort of happen. I think in some ways the tapering off growth at every cost is a good thing, because it will also make sure that a lot more people are looking at businesses in a slightly more sustainable way, in a more coherent way. And I think a lot more smaller companies will have a real chance, instead of the market and the entire funding landscape being crowded out by like 5 companies. So I think it's an okay thing.
Yeah. Naya, my next question is to you. So what we are hearing is that founders often contemplate procuring some bridge financing through debt, as against diluting at a low valuation, especially when fundraising becomes a challenge, right? Like today's times. And then yet again, there are some founders like you all, who also rise to the occasion and seek opportunities during adversities and add on services or products which become the silver lining of additional revenue amidst the dark clouds of slowdown. So what have been your thoughts around this? And could you take us through some of the things that you have done or would advise any entrepreneur in this situation?
So, Archana, just to, at the very highest level, I think every company has to go through their own journey, right? So for some founders, it might be sensible at that point in time to take on debt. For some founders, it might be sensible at that point in time to do a bridge financing round. And for some founders, when they look at where they are today, there might be opportunities they are seeing that they want to make most of, right? And I think it all depends. Again, it's a very, very context-specific answer. And it's not even an answer, actually. It's a perspective that you follow down. And, hopefully it comes to the right sort of answer for you as a founder, right? And I think that's really one thing I want to sort of start off with, this very, very broad caveat on. Now, in terms of how we have approached this, I think something that we, again, and it wasn't planned per se, but in the middle of last year itself, we started seeing, I think we took 2 very specific calls. The first call that we took was that, this whole growth of users just for the sake of growth of users wasn't something we wanted to go down the pathway of. Because, eventually what we realized is when organic users found us, and that was at a certain scale already, right? They were the ones who made the most of the platform versus paying to acquire users at scale, right? So, and I think the second sort of conscious call we took also at that same time was that, as a company, what we need to think about is, if we are adding value to our customers, to our families, right? Are they willing to pay for that value that we are adding to them, right? And therefore, what all ended up happening as a result of these 2 decisions was that we actually looked very, very closely at, at our monthly burn, at our monthly revenue run rates, at the sources of revenue, the revenue streams. All of that became extremely clear to us, right? And we started focusing on saying that, listen, going forward, we're going to be a company that has that pretty much is on the pathway to profitability, right? And literally, like, as closely, I think, like, of course, COVID happened, but we'd already fortunately figured out two revenue streams, right? One which has been impacted a little bit because obviously logistics is down, the warehouse is not accessible on our private label piece, but nonetheless, I think the brands piece has actually been a portfolio to us, right? And has balanced out that risk and sort of helped us, meet like our revenue targets at about 70% or 65% of what we projected for this month, right? So I think that portfolio approach, as well as from the very beginning, and it's been like an 8 to 9 month exercise, not a recent exercise just because of COVID, it has helped us reach to a point where, frankly, we are on the pathway to profitability on a monthly basis, right? We know how to get there. And at the same time, we are growing. We're growing with the right set of users. We're growing with the right set of families. The engagement levels have spiked, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of us have alluded to this, but, users are now using us more than 5 to 10 times a day through the period of the lockdown, right? And that's an average. And of course, you have like a long tail of users who use us a lot more frequently as well, right? So I think, just because we were in a certain, we went through a certain introspection at a certain point in time, I think it was the right call for us to take in hindsight. But of course, at that point in time, it was a lot of FOMO, right? Because, I think Sairi put this well. There were so many companies who were just like, put money, just grow, right? And it was very difficult for us, again, 8-9 months back, if you put things in perspective, right, to take that call and say, no, let's like really focus on revenues, right? Let's really focus on like cutting down on paid marketing when we're not seeing like really any impact in terms of our mission alignment coming from that aspect, right? So I think it's been difficult calls, and it's just so happened that COVID has now come out and everyone's talking about cutting down your costs, etc. And of course we've optimized even further. But I think it's just been, I think, business fundamentals that we kind of like perhaps were reminded of 8-9 months back, or like we took a call as a team that let's kind of like try and stick to the straight and narrow that has helped us out at this point in time.
Right. So what we're seeing is a lot more founders are now taking the time to plan, looking at reinvention of the existing business models to suit in the post-COVID business environment. Are there any kind of survival strategies which all of you can talk about? I know you've already mentioned some of them, but for our entrepreneur friends who come and ask that, what are the survival strategies right now? Sari, if we can start with you,
right,
and then Naya.
Yeah. So, we say this often in our team meetings, do not die. Like, so actually we did a fun modeling exercise to say, let's say, and this is obviously a war-like situation, or, even today, at least internet's working. Like, I'm so thankful internet's working, right? Like, and there's still water, and, it's, we're safe in our homes and we're getting food to eat. So I think, so we did basically a little sort of, hypothetical role playing where we said, look, what is the basic minimum we need today to keep ourselves going, right? So, and obviously, thankfully, as internet for company, we don't have like a lot of overheads, and how many people do we need to keep this company going? And you won't believe it. They actually came down to literally like 5 people and a server to keep the company alive, right? Like, just to sort of, if a meteoroid struck, or, if something even worse happened, what would we do, right? And that was basically to give people a little perspective, right? Because when times are good, you want more, we're always hiring, we're always spending, everything is urgent and important. The priorities are a little sort of, all over. But a time like this gives you a sense of, perspective to say what is really important here, so keeping everyone safe, keeping everyone's well-being in mind, making sure that, we have the firepower to sort of, get out of this alive in every way possible. So I keep saying, do not die, because that really means that what is the bare minimum you need to sort of get there, and make provisions for that. And don't worry about what will people say and like, everything else that comes with it. So also, I think a lot of people are using this context to sort of lose their humanity, right? Like, I mean, look, ultimately, a company that wants to cut costs is also going to cut jobs. It's going to cut sort of, a lot of people who are sort of dependent on it. And I think in normal situation, if this was just a financial disaster, let's say this was Lehman, straight on cost cutting sort of makes sense. But this is a lockdown, which means, nothing else is moving. There's no chance for survival for other people. And I think while everything else will come back, it's also an important opportunity to sort of define the values of your business, because I think things change, but the values stick by you, and they're also compass for the business to make a decision for your teams. This is a time to decide between the bricklayers and the church builders, right? So in some ways, it's kind of very important to not let go of the fact that you stand by certain things, or you will make sure people are protected with at least the basics, because I think your humanity needs to come before your business, irrespective of what happens. And I think the other survival strategy is to experiment. A lot of people say don't do new things, and our traditional wisdom says, but the cost of experimentation in today's economy is very low. It's really, really low. And a lot can be done with very frugal sort of experimentation. And I think especially for tech-driven companies, this is a great opportunity. So we're working on 2 projects which didn't exist before the lockdown, but one of them takes off. We will have a a lot more interesting roadmap going forward. And I think and what it does is it keeps the spirit of your team alive, because if whether we're locked down or not, everybody wants to still do good work. They all want to sort of feel more than themselves. The idea of being part of something that's larger than yourself still drives people in a major way, and especially when they're not working with teammates in person. So I think those are sort of some thoughts there.
Right. Smriti?
I think we've been hearing the mantra, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And that's really what summarizes the strategies that one can look at. I think I can bucket these strategies into 4 aspects, and that's what we've kind of followed with our portfolio companies as well. The first one being crisis response. Right? Suddenly, business continuity planning is the key word. It's funny, but till now, BCP policies were just part of some operational manual in companies. Nobody ever looked at it and nobody thought through it. But the first thing we all went back to see is, what's your business continuity planning? Where is it? Right? So the promoters, the companies have had to sit down and think about how do you continue your business, keeping these restrictions in mind. And secondly, how do you implement them? And what's the best way to do that? So first thing we asked all our portfolio companies is to kind of dig up the BCPs, see what corrections need to be made. And an outcome of that was companies created a crisis nerve center, a set of people who monitor the development on a day-to-day basis. How do you, liaise with the various stakeholders? What is the impact on each, segment of your business, and so on and so forth. We also looked at, helping the companies to reach out to their vendors, reach out to the customers, what kind of restructuring of payments can be done, what kind of restructuring on receipts can be done, if not now, when can you pay? So there's a lot of collaboration, engagement that happened, as part of this whole crisis response, activity that started as soon as the lockdowns were announced. Which also included a lot about the well-being of the customers, the well-being of the staff involved in the companies, which comes first. The second aspect to it is an impact assessment. Like, what are the different scenarios that are going to play out from here? We have a scenario A, B, C, D. Expect the worst, and the A would be probably the best, and somewhere you will lie somewhere between. And then you have to kind of list down all the key core competencies that you have in your business. What's the cost attached to it? What is the additions that you had done which you can do away with? So complete impact assessment on various parameters will help the promoters and has helped promoters to actually identify which phase of or which scenario we are in and how should we respond to that. The third aspect, which is also very important, is your stakeholder management. you have to keep your ecosystem completely aligned and informed. Be it your owners, investors, be it your employees, most important at this point in time, and be it your customers, vendors, banks, wherever you are partnerships, wherever you have engagement. I think it's important to align everybody, inform them about the impact that you're seeing, what is the kind of reflection you'll have on the business and so on and so forth. So you have to keep them engaged, because only then will they be able to appreciate what the business is going through and support in every possible way. And the last aspect, which Sairi very well touched upon, was new areas. Like, now you have the time to think. You had a lot of things in the back of your head that we should be doing this, we should be doing that, but never got down to actually doing it. So this is the time to really introspect, look at your business model, what are the things which you can add on, and just get prepared for that. As you might not be able to implement everything today, but at least start accelerating your thoughts so that when you come out of this situation, you're ready to kind of take it forward. One simple example, my specific sector, if I were to kind of look at it, our sector completely focuses or works on cash, right? It's cash disbursement, cash collection, all through. So we had the first event which was demonetization about a couple of years ago, and demonetization triggered something called as digitizing the operation, something called as digital collection, digital disbursement, so on and so forth, on to doing cashless disbursement. But they were still going slow on cashless collections. They still wanted to get in the field, do collection in cash and so on and so forth. And we've been pushing all our portfolio companies to accelerate it. But I see this as an inflection point where as soon as you come out of this, everybody will have a technology for collecting digital payments or repayments. So there are so many things in your closet which you have to implement or are important for bringing in efficiencies to your operations. You will start looking at that now and be prepared to adapt to it as soon as we are coming out. So I would bucket a survival strategy into these 4 categories for all the promoters.
That's great. Naya, your thoughts?
So I think 3 broad points. The first one is team always comes first, right? So the safety, the well-being, the security of the team is absolutely top of mind, and I think that sort of manifested itself in a couple of decisions. First was, before the lockdown was announced, we basically, mandated work from home. The team really stepped up, Archana, to give them full credit, I think. And also because we, at the heart of it, we are a tech and a product company, right? I think so we already had a set of systems in place that helped that out a fair bit and sort of helped facilitate that. But there were some very real practical challenges, right? And in ensuring the safety and security of our teams, we do have a lot of working parents who are working at Baby Chakra and are working parents therefore, and therefore have kids at home. And like a kid doesn't have a calendar, so a kid sees his or her mother or father at home and he's at the door. Or if you don't have a door, a lot of our staff obviously and our team members are not people with like multiple bedrooms and one study room and all of that, right? They're really practical challenges in terms of how do you figure out the best way to work with at home with family, right? And I think what really helped there was that I think the team really stepped up and said, this is a time where as a team and as a mission, and if our mission is to be a companion to parents, and it's a companion to our parents as well within the team, right? And we figured out, I think our talent lead played an amazing role, plus the team lead played an amazing role in figuring out how to ensure that there were periods in time that were completely marked out for personal time, right? For time with your family, for sort of basic home chores, as the case might be. There were a lot of other problems like internet issues. A lot of our team members who did more operational roles and now were, switching gears to doing stuff more online, right? They didn't have access to steady internet connection. So, again, how the talent lead kind of stepped up and ensured that, internet, which has pretty much now become a basic right, how did they have access to it on a regular basis? Insurance, right, to cover specific COVID insurance for the team members. So I think a lot of these decisions which sort of focus on the team first, and even when it came to, again, maintaining that cash is king, absolutely, even for a company like ours. But the fact that the leadership team basically said that below a certain amount of money that was being paid out to team members, who were below a certain salary bar, they would absorb the costs, right? They would absorb the hit, right? And they would not let it percolate down to, team members who were below a certain salary slab. I think it was just like this whole thing about having team first, front and center at a time of crisis like this, which is, I think, a source of personal inspiration for me, the way the team kind of came together. I think the second thing that, we realized as well is that I think, and a lot of both of you said it's really well, it is a time for us to also understand the impact we can create together, right? And the disproportionate, I think, responsibility we have today towards, our constituents, right? Our families that we serve. So, we've actually over-indexed on, I think Sairi talked about having a domestic violence helpline, right? For us, the answer was, how do you bring on more doctors to the platform to ensure that more of these doctors could give free medical advice to mothers who did not have access. OPDs are shut, the doctors are not operating, right? So, for them to get access to care at a time when they needed it most, also to dispel fake news, panic, any myths, any, misconceptions around COVID, right? We had like a lot of desperate sort of conversations by mothers who were in the 9 months of pregnancy and struggling, like, how do I take care of myself if I go to hospital, and how do I take care of my older child when I come back from hospital, right? So I think these were the things that we've sort of tried to do with the community of care that we've been able to build out. And I think the third thing is in terms of innovations, which I think is again core. We've cut out actually a lot of innovations we were planning to do earlier, because now in the COVID scenario, there's some very specific kind of innovations that we are betting will now form the future for the company, right? So there are things that we were doing in the past, which was more focused on, offline outreach, offline retailers to spread, the sort of the footprint of our products, etc. Doing a lot more offline campaigns with doctor clinics, etc. All of that has been cut out, right? So those were innovations we were planning earlier. Now we're looking at innovations which are, COVID's not going away anytime soon, right? So it's going to be there for at least 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months. At least the repercussions will be there, right? So how do you plan your innovations with that context in mind? I think that agility is something that we are trying to, constantly sort of innovate together as a team on, and trying to address together as a team on, and really sort of, again, sharply prioritizing, even on the innovation agenda, what are we really focusing our innovations on?
I think these are some amazing set of pointers for our entrepreneur friends on this. Like even, Naya, when you speak about employees that, stepping up to the, rising up to the occasion, it's something really good, because most of the times what we hear is that employees are expecting from the entrepreneur, right? And it has to be like together, right? It's like a family. You have to work together towards a survival strategy. So that's great. And, elongating your cash runway as much as possible to live through these challenging times seems to be a must now. Cash is not just king, but also key, right? So non-essential expenses need to be cut down, pivoting business models. And as you all rightly said, utilizing the time available to further enhance your offerings, and to whatever extent you can digitize your offerings has also become very key. And financial frugality is the most essential philosophy, I think, to follow, which, I think all of us are doing that in our own domains, right? So, Smriti, my next question is to you. Like, a lot of people are saying that working from home will become a new normal and help save on different facets of OPEX. In your view, will it become a new standalone normal, or more of an added construct where we, do a combination of both, where we have an office, plus we are open to a lot of the teammates working from home and have like a 70-30%, something like that?
Yeah, I don't think it'll move from one end to the other. It'll obviously have to be a combination. And I think a lot of companies which have now realized that working from home is actually possible will do this 70-30, 60-40 constructs, surely. And I see a lot of companies already doing it or announcing it, irrespective of, the lockdowns and stuff. I think if I look at consultancy services, which I'm most closest to, all of them have been rethinking on, having the real estate space, crunching down the office space and giving a rotation. What I also see as a very important change that is going to come through this, and which culturally we've not been able to do for so long, is the impact of women working from home. I think it's always been that women working from home is not as productive. Should you really hire them? Should you really recruit them? And we see a lot of misogyny around this in many corporates and many large MNC setups. But I think this this has kind of proven that yes, anybody can work from home wherever possible. And there will be a lot of emphasis that will come to rehiring women who moved out of because of maternity, or really tapping into the talent pool which mothers have on a flexi hours basis. A lot of those policies and a lot of those changes are going to come, is my opinion and my hope too from this.
Right. And in fact, that was my next question to Seri, considering that Sheroz, this is a big part, work from home is a big part of what Sheroz does as well. Yeah. So Seri, do you think that there will be a possible spike of women participation in workforce in India if work from home becomes the new normal?
Right. So I was just thinking that, the number of women who could have kept their careers had we adopted this earlier, the number of women who sort of, gave up their careers or sort of dropped out of workforce because they either didn't find flexibility or remote work is just astounding. We have a business line around remote work, and we've been running it for almost 3 years. And, till the lockdown happened, our sales cycle used to be really long. Basically, we had to go and sell work from home to people, to managers, to business heads, to CEOs. And it would take us weeks. It would take us averagely 6 to 8 weeks to sort of close a sale. And now we're doing it in 2 weeks because we don't have to sell work from home anymore. And, and I think on one side, it's a wonderful thing, but it's also coming at a bad time because there are not going to be many jobs up for offering, right? So we need more innovation there. So I do see phenomena like, workforce and cloud, lot more gig availability, shift workers, and a lot more micro entrepreneurs. I think workforce losses, entrepreneurships gain. More and more women are going to be part of GDP creation. They may not be employed as full-time workers because I think we're yet to sort of see the beginning of that cycle happen. But clearly the opportunities have become more democratic. And I think overall it's a good thing. I do expect to see more women in, coding jobs, more women in, opportunities which they otherwise wouldn't sort of be even considered for, right? And I think in some way this is a different sort of flattening of the curve.
Right. Given that all of us are also mothers, right, on this session, how is it turning out handling both work from home and child at home at the same time?
Right.
Naya, let's start with you.
So Arya is all of 14 months. So she's small. But as I mentioned earlier, I think she's amazing. I think she's been quite a trooper. Fortunately for me, I think she's been quite an independent child always. And, I've been working pretty much ever since I gave birth, and either at home or at work. So I think she's a very independent individual, and I'm one of the lucky ones. I actually had a support structure at home, right? I have a nanny with Arya. I have someone at home who helps me with the cooking and helps my husband with the cooking, and also the house maintenance, etc. So I'm one of the privileged ones, right? I do want to call out one concern I have, which is that, while the work from home paradigm is extremely exciting, I think it's going to open up, and I think I'm really excited about it opening up a bunch of opportunities for mothers like us, for women like us. I'm really still concerned about the support service ecosystem still not being there in place to even support a mother who is at home, and now she is working, but the work at home is not really being distributed equally still, right? And then, of course, that compounded with the fact that the lockdown continues to extend. And, for the foreseeable future, we will maintain. I mean, I was on a conference call the other day with the Early Childhood Association. When are preschools opening? When are daycares opening, right? When are the support structures? When are if you don't have a full-time help at home to help you out, if your parents typically would come and visit you, all of that support infrastructure that was, in the old normal does not exist in the current new normal. So what I'm very, very worried about is that while we keep on putting all of this, and this is an amazing opportunity for women, we really need our men and we really need our corporations to step up, right? And ensure that women can make use of this opportunity. Because otherwise it's going to be like a double whammy on the women like us and women that we know. So I just want to sound that out, because I think, now more than ever, the onus is on the man at home, is on the team who's figuring out the rules and regulations around working from home, on how to make this work for the women who are now taking on these opportunities.
I absolutely agree. In fact, my perspective on this is in the context of privilege allowing contribution. I think it is this privilege which allows folks like us to work and concentrate on our business, which results in ensuring continuity and sustainability for our employees as well. This always brings me to the thought that every entrepreneur is not just responsible for his or her business, but also for the multiple households that depend on the functioning of that business. I, in fact, feel that I'm blessed and fortunate to be able to have an ecosystem around me which takes care of my house, my son, and thereby allows me to concentrate on my work. But you know how it is with a 22-month-old toddler. I have a son who constantly demands my attention. And in that context, working from home can get a bit challenging, as I have to literally hide and lock myself in a room while I'm working. But these are good problems to have. Smriti, what are your views?
Yeah, I was saying I have a 6-year-old. So for him, it's been like Mama is at home, which means I don't have work. Because whenever, otherwise it's like I'm going to office, and when I come home, it's usually his time. I don't really pick up too much work when I'm at home. But now he equates it to the fact that the whole day I'm at home, I don't really have work. So it's taken some time to actually get him to understand that Mama and Papa are actually working from home and not to kind of come in between. But there is a challenge. He does seek attention, and I think balancing it out, making sure that you're there for him when he needs. Otherwise, the transition has been pretty seamless for me. I anyway have my entire team in Norway, and I work typically on a long distance communication basis, even on a regular day. So it's just me and another colleague here. So from a work perspective, I don't think much has changed. But yes, balancing it out, being at home along with the kid who is wanting your attention is been a key difference. And of course, sorting your essentials out, getting the groceries and getting that and getting this in the right time. That's been a challenge.
Your thoughts?
Right. So I have a 13-year-old, and so this place looks like a hostel because we all sort of get ready in the morning and lock ourselves in respective rooms and like do not emerge until 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock until sort of everyone's done with their work. So in some ways it's the new normal. Thankfully, having an older child is sort of having a mini adult at home, so which means you can also make them work, you can ask them to help out. Of course, those are different conversations, than new demands of video games and stuff. But I think like what you guys said, we are slightly lucky. We have help, but like I look at my team. So for example, as a team, we will say, please, no conversations between 6 and 8, 0 hour. We don't want to talk about work during that time. And a lot of new moms, a lot of young moms, a lot of women who live with joint families. Nobody talks about the emotional work that women have to do when then they are sort of in a very larger system. So I see that, I see many women in my team sort of struggling to keep up because they just sort of, they're on forever. So in some ways the lockdown has slowed us. We try and, keep some sanity between work. And otherwise, in normal course, we wouldn't do it at all. We would forever be churning, and office was a nice way to get away from, the madness at home. But since everybody's at home now, and of course, I think just the whole, the vibe, right? Like just the uncertainty of this whole situation, loss of freedom, loss of choices. So as a team, we try to sort of, catch up, spend some time on, like we had a whole, we celebrated this, one of our colleagues' birthday. He lives alone. And so we did like a Zoom party, and everybody sang and everybody shared poetry, and we made complete fools of ourselves. But it was fine. It was fine to sort of, let yourself down, let your hair down a bit. So yeah, I think just survive whatever it takes.
Right. What the other thing which I just lastly want to talk about is that we are seeing everyone talk about honing their skills. Somebody's doing following some passion, doing something which they wanted to do for long. I've been seeing that a lot. And what I faced as a challenge is that I was not really able to create that so-called me time zone, given all of these other parameters around. But I wanted to ask three of you, did you have the opportunity to hone any skills or follow any of your passions during the
The answer is no. I don't want to get very competitive. I think there's enough going on with everyone, and it's a pandemic. It's not a competition. So just be nice to yourself.
Somebody posted that it's okay. Like there was some joke going around. First, everyone was talking about how I've done this, done that, and then there was this poster saying it's a pandemic and it's not a competition. And I actually felt good when I read that. I was like, thank God.
I think it's all right. If those things are so exciting. I mean, look, everybody works in a different way, right? To some people, cooking and baking is therapeutic. Even my daughter's cooking, like she's making her own food. She bakes cakes. My husband's cooking. I can't stand cooking, so I'm not, right? Similarly, but I do my yoga. I go for my exercise. I walk. Whatever I can do to sort of, get my time off. But I'm not trying to sort of, like, for example, I was thinking when this whole thing happened that I'm going to read all these books. We all buy books that we don't read. And I was like, oh, I'm going to finish them all. I've done nothing, and the truth is, we've all also been very busy. I think there is a lot of cognitive overload on all of us, right? We're all sort of occupied in our head. We're busy. We're always sort of like, and it's, and I think till such time work is sort of, where it is, I don't see ourselves doing, any of that. The only difference that the lockdowns made to my life is, I have never worn makeup all my life. I didn't even own a lipstick. But now when I come on calls, I put on lipstick because I'm not even wearing my shoes, right? So how do I say that I'm at work? So that's become like a highlighter to say this is your work zone. When you put on a lipstick and you open your computer, you're at work. So it's a little bit of like self sign, in my head, but it's fine. Whatever helps you, get through this.
Right. Smriti?
Yeah, I mean, as Sairi was saying, when the lockdown started, I think there's this whole list of, you can do this, or you can learn that, or you can, read all these books that, you've listed upon and never ended up reading, but nothing at all. I don't think between work and managing a child, it's all gone away. Yes. One thing which I've been able to do is every evening, so I've been a dancer all through my life. I've done various forms of dancing pretty much till I gave birth to my son, and after that it kind of tanked down, really didn't have the time. So at least now every evening I think we spend about 45 minutes picking up a song and dancing on it, or learning a new routine, or just exercising on music with my son. So that's a fun activity that we do, and we've religiously done it, I think 25 days out of 30, so I'm quite happy about that.
That's amazing. So I'm a singer, and but every time I try to take out my guitar or my keyboard, my toddler starts jumping on it, right? And he can break it, so I have to keep it back. And the only form of singing I've been doing is singing all the nursery rhymes to him and dancing with him. So I can relate to that. Thank you so much for this. This has been really, really helpful. And I'm sure there'll be so many takeaways for everybody, for our entrepreneur friends, for our other friends, for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arch.
Thank you. We had fun.